I stepped out of the taxi, smoothing the front of my dress blues, the medals on my chest weighing more than usual. The hushed anticipation of finally returning home after 6 months deployed in a high-security zone was the only force keeping me upright, but then I lifted my eyes. Planted squarely in the center of my perfectly trimmed lawn stood a sign in glaring red letters. Sold behind it. Two men wearing coveralls were dragging my life straight through the front door. My books, my framed commendations, my clothes, and flinging them into a dumpster as if they were worthless trash. Standing on the porch, observing it all with beers clutched loosely in their hands, were my father, Richard, and my brother Caleb. Richard didn't smile. He didn't wave. He simply pointed an idle finger toward the dumpster and said, "You don't live here anymore." We cashed out. Before I tell you what I found in that dumpster and the secret document that was about to destroy their entire celebration, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I tightened the strap of my bag and started moving up the driveway, my boots grinding against the gravel in a rhythm I'd refined over years of service. My name is Jordan, and I'm 29 years old. In my field, high-level logistics and intelligence. For special operations, you learn fast that the loudest voice in any room is usually the weakest link. Panic was a privilege I couldn't afford overseas, and I certainly wasn't about to waste it on these two. As I closed the space between us, I caught Richard's eyes twitch slightly. He anticipated a meltdown. He expected the emotional daughter he could twist into submission. Instead, he got a ghost. I stopped at the base of the steps, staring up at them. The power structure was physically arranged to shrink me, but I'd never felt taller. "Caleb landed in serious trouble," Richard said, taking a long pull from his beer as if describing a minor accident. "He owes the wrong people serious money. $120,000 to be exact." "We had to act fast." "We?" I asked, my voice level. I don't recall being included in the we that chose to liquidate my assets. "Family sacrifices for family, Jordan," he snapped. It's the familiar manipulation sliding off his tongue like sacred verse. "You're single, you stay in barracks half the time anyway. You don't need a house. Your brother required a lifeline." I looked at the house rising behind him. I remembered the day I purchased it. I was 22, fresh off my first combat deployment, holding a check built from hazard pay and sleepless nights. That house wasn't simply wood and drywall. It was the only place on earth where I didn't have to watch my back. I renovated it with my own hands, sanding the floors until my fingers split, painting the walls a muted gray that finally softened the noise inside my head. I remembered Richard standing in this exact place back then, telling me I was selfish for buying property while Caleb struggled to cover rent. They tried to make me feel ashamed for stability then. Now they were punishing me for it, but they committed a critical miscalculation in their judgment. They believed they had stripped away my armor. They failed to understand that the house was only bricks. The fortress lived inside me, and they couldn't reach that. "You used the power of attorney." I said it plainly. It wasn't a question. "You signed it," Caleb added, a smirk tugging at his mouth. He lifted his wrist to check the time, and sunlight flashed across the thick gold face of a brand new Rolex. It looked flashy, costly, and purchased with a down payment on my sanctuary. "It was legal, sis. Dad saved my life. You should be grateful you helped." He didn't look rescued. He looked comfortable and smug. K parasite who had finally fed enough on the host to feel dominant. K signed a power of attorney for medical decisions. I said, my eyes fixed on the watch. "In case I came home in a coffin. Not so you could plunder my life while I was still breathing." "It's done," Richard said, brushing me aside with a dismissive flick of his hand. "The buyer is signing the final transfer in 10 minutes. The money for the loan sharks is already wired. You can stay at the motel near the highway until you redeploy. It's not a big deal." That was the instant the last fragile thread of attachment snapped. It wasn't merely theft, it was erasure to them. I wasn't a person with a history, a future, or rights. I was a resource to be harvested. while it was an asset line they could liquidate to offset bad decisions. They hadn't only sold my house. They had sold me. I shifted my gaze from the Rolex to Richard's defiant stare. "Is the buyer here?" I asked. "She's inside completing a final walkthrough," Richard said. "Don't you dare cause a scene, Jordan. She paid cash. We need this deal finalized." I smiled. Was a cold, precise expression I normally reserved for enemy combatants. "I wouldn't dream of causing a scene," I said, stepping onto the porch. "I just want to meet the new owner." The door opened before I could knock, and a woman in a beige pantsuit stepped out. This was Sarah. One glance revealed everything I needed to understand she wasn't a couple searching for beginnings. She was an investor. Calculating eyes, polished manicure. The sort of person who studies rooms for margins, not memories. She gripped the deed tightly like it was a blade. "You must be the daughter," she said, her voice edged with dismissal. She didn't extend a handshake. "Your father mentioned you might appear. Listen, honey, it's finished. The documents are executed. The funds have transferred. I require you off my property before authorities are called." I looked beyond her shoulder. Richard stood beside the kitchen island, clutching a bank receipt in shaking fingers. His cheeks were flushed with the reckless high of survival. He glanced up, spotted me through the open doorway, and smiled a broad, victorious grin that twisted my stomach. "It's over, Jordan," he shouted, waving the receipt wildly. 120,000, wired directly to the loan sharks. "Caleb is cleared. The remaining balance rests in a secure account already. You can't reach it." He wasn't remorseful, wasn't torn, he was thrilled. He believed he had executed the perfect crime against his own daughter. I turned back to Sarah. "You transferred the entire amount." 650,000, she replied, glancing at her watch impatiently. "Cash, it finalized 10 minutes ago. Now please remove yourself from my porch." I remained still. I allowed the silence to lengthen, observing Richard's triumph and Sarah's irritation. This was the instant. The snare was prepared. The bait accepted, and the trapdoor had just sealed shut. Asterisk, you really should have waited for the title search, I said quietly. Sarah laughed sharply. "I purchase distressed properties with cash frequently. I bypass formalities to outpace the market. I understand exactly what I'm doing. Do you?" I slid my hand into the inner pocket of my jacket. The paper I withdrew wasn't a weapon, but it would inflict more destruction than any rifle I'd carried before. "Because had you completed a title search, you would have discovered that Richard doesn't own this property. He has power of attorney," Sarah interrupted, though her gaze darted anxiously toward the page in my grip. "I reviewed the paperwork personally. He holds a general power of attorney," I clarified, "granting authority to act for Jordan the individual. But Jordan the individual no longer possesses this property." I unfolded the sheet and raised it between us. It was a certified deed transfer copy, stamped and dated 48 hours before my deployment orders. I moved the title into the Jordan Revocable Living Trust 6 months ago, I said, my voice slicing through the air. "My father is not a trustee. He holds zero authority over the trust's holdings. He cannot sell what he never owned." I shifted my focus past her toward Richard, who had stopped mid-celebration. The receipt in his hand no longer resembled a prize, but an accusation. "That signature printed on your contract." I gestured toward the pages Sarah clutched. "It isn't a valid sale. It's forgery. And because you transferred funds across state lines relying on falsified documents, that constitutes federal wire fraud." Sarah grabbed the document from my grasp. Her eyes raced over the legal language, the timestamps, the embossed trust seal. The color drained from her face so quickly she seemed ready to collapse. The deed she held, the one she'd paid over $500,000 for, carried no legal value. "You," she murmured, lifting her gaze toward Richard, "you claimed full authority." "I do," Richard yelled, hurrying toward the doorway, panic splintering his voice. I have the POA. It's right here. Read the fine print, Dad, I said coldly. It authorizes medical decisions and personal banking matters. It does not extend to assets inside a trust. You just transferred a house you don't own to a woman who just lost $650,000. I turned back to Ward. Sarah, her disbelief was already transforming into Hunter's fury. Give me my money back, she hissed, spinning toward Richard immediately. Reverse the wire transfer now. Richard staggered backward, colliding with the counter. I can't. What do you mean you can't? Sarah strode deeper into the house, her costly heels striking the hardwood like gunfire. Send it back immediately. I already forwarded the money for Caleb, Richard shouted, the confession ripping free. It's gone. The loan sharks collected it. I can't retrieve it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sarah stared at him. Caleb studied the floor, and I simply observed, feeling the cold, measured satisfaction of a completed operation. They had craved fast cash. They had tried to cut me out. Instead, they marched directly into a minefield I prepared months earlier, and now escape was impossible. Sarah glared at Richard, her features twisting into raw, predatory rage. The polished, professional mask she'd worn minutes earlier vanished, replaced by horrifying clarity that she'd been swindled of over $500,000. She stepped closer to him. For a heartbeat, I thought she might strike him. You wired it, she said, her voice shaking with fury. You sent my funds to criminals. 'Twas a loan, Richard stuttered, retreating until the refrigerator stopped him. Sweat beaded on his forehead, sliding into his collar. I can fix this. Just give me days. We can repair it. Repair it? Sarah barked a brittle laugh. If you don't have days, you don't have hours. You committed grand larceny. That capital belonged to my investors. Do you grasp what you've done? She didn't wait for explanation. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911. I need to report fraud happening now. Major theft involved. Yes, the suspect remains on scene. Richard watched her call, his eyes hollow and stunned. Then, slowly, his gaze drifted toward me. The fear in his face hardened into something darker and familiar. It wasn't shame. It wasn't regret. It was blazing indignation from a narcissist, exposed publicly. You did this, he spat, jabbing a trembling finger toward me. I held my position, leaning against the doorway, arms folded. I didn't sign anything, Richard. I didn't transfer funds. You knew, he screamed, voice splintering. He lunged forward, only stopping when Caleb seized his arm. You watched me do it. You let me execute those documents. You let me send that money. I offered you a choice, I replied calmly. I asked whether you wanted honesty. You chose deceit. You chose to escalate it. You set me up, he roared. Staring at me anymore? He stared past me through the open doorway, where Mr. Halpern and several neighbors gathered along the sidewalk, drawn by shouting. That was the true wound. Not cuffs. Humiliation. The collapse of his carefully maintained image as benevolent patriarch. You wanted to shame me? He yelled, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. You wanted them watching. You wanted your father branded criminal? You are a criminal, I corrected. I simply switched on the lights. I raised you, he yelled, rewriting history to shield his ego. I gave you everything, and this is your repayment. By trapping me. By destroying your brother over a house unused. I understood then, even facing prison, he couldn't see himself villainous. My independence felt like betrayal. My survival felt like assault. I didn't trap you, I said steadily. I safeguarded myself. If my protection feels like ambush, that explains everything. Sirens wailed outside. Red and blue lights flooded the room. Sarah provided Dispatch's full name. Caleb collapsed onto the floor, muttering frantically. The fury drained from my father when he saw officers approach. Maria, he pleaded, shifting tactics. You can end this. Tell them it was confusion. Your father, you stopped being my father when you treated me like an account balance. The officer stepped in and cuffed him calmly. Neighbors watched as the ruler of this home was escorted away. I thought it ended there until Caleb blocked my path. You think you won? He said, raising his phone. On the display was a drafted message. To my division's inspector general accusing me of trafficking stolen equipment, false invoices, forged transfers. One allegation like this, he whispered, and your clearance disappears. Drop the charges, sign the house over, or I press send. I didn't plead. I laughed. Go ahead, I said. Send it. He hesitated. My finances undergo monthly audits, I continued. Your fabricated files contradict federal databases. If you transmit that, you're confessing, not exposing. His phone slipped from his hand. Arrogance dissolved. Into panic, I signaled to the officers. He's attempting extortion using falsified military records. I want charges filed. They cuffed him as well. He screamed it was harmless. Intent alone was sufficient. As the cruisers pulled away, the burden finally eased. I wasn't anyone's shield anymore. I removed the sold sign from the lawn and tossed it away. Inside, the house stood hollow and silent. For the first time in years, nobody required rescue. I reset the security codes. A single clear beep confirmed it. I wasn't joyful yet, but I was secure, and that was enough. If you've ever become the villain in someone else's narrative to survive, share this.